Hey there, students. It is I, Mr. Mercas, and we're back with another digital lesson. So this digital lesson is for my 6th grade students who are currently on remote learning, working on their Unit 6 2-column notes. And this is the video lesson for Unit 6 2-column notes, pages 250 to 254. And this is the very last set of 2-column notes that you guys will be taking out of your textbook for the school year. So today we're going to be learning about Peru, which is a very important country that's located along the western coast of South America. And this is what this video lesson will be done with today. So ideally, as you guys are working your guys' 2-column notes, you should be reading and taking 2-column notes and also following along in this video lesson, so that way you guys can get your information recorded. So that being said, let's get this video lesson on a roll. So first of all, let's go on and talk about the date line real quick. So it says at Chincha Islands, Peru, 1842. It says official recently announced a major new source of prosperity for Peru. Dried seabird droppings called guano are now being exported around the world to be used as plant fertilizer. The idea of using guano as fertilizer came from ancient Incan farmers. Recently, scientific research has confirmed that guano is rich in phosphates and nitrates, which helps plants to grow. Fertilizer companies in Britain and other countries are now paying huge sums of money for the right to dig up guano from Peru. So yes, droppings from both birds as well as bats was used as fertilizer back in the day. Also, another interesting factor about this, phosphates and nitrates they talk about here is also key ingredients to be used in gunpowder. So because of that, during the 1800s, a lot of explosives and weapons and guns and stuff were also using this guano in order to produce explosive components for those weapons as well, which is actually kind of interesting. So, as always, you guys, we're going to highlight different sections of your guys' book. Whatever we got in highlighted in green should be in the left-hand column, and whatever's highlighted in yellow should be in the right-hand column. Now, the reason why we're talking about guano is like, why are we talking about droppings, Mr. Mercasa? The reason why we're talking about these things is because Peru has actually been very abundant in natural resources. And so because of that, that's just one of the many things that makes the country of Peru interesting in terms of its natural resources. So first of all, let's go and talk about the geography of the country first of all. So let me get this highlighted in green with the land of Peru. Whatever I highlight in yellow should be in the right-hand column of your guys' notes. So it says, though Peru is rich in resources such as guano, variations in its physical geography also present problems. There are 3 types of landforms exist within Peru. We have mountains, rainforests, as well as deserts. And each type has its own special characteristics, but all 3 are transportation barriers rather than transportation corridors. We learned about this a little bit when we talked about South America's geography. Right, traveling from one part of Peru is not easy. So for traveling from one part of the country to another part is extremely difficult, and the reason why is because of its physical geography. So if you look down here below, we actually have a little bit of the country here with terms of its geography. So like, for example, here's some physical features that they talk about here as well. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail. So 3 types of landforms. So let's go and read that section real quick. As says, look at the map above, you can see that the Andes Mountains runs the entire length of Peru. So this part is true. Dividing the country into 2. In places, the mountains are so steep that they are practically impassable. Notice that off the eastern slopes of the Andes stretches into the rainforest, which is called the selva in Spanish. Now look to the west of the Andes. So we have the selva, which is basically where the rainforest is located. Now look to the west of the Andes along the Pacific coast. Here the northern stretches of Chile's Atacama Desert reach into Peru. Most of Peru's cities, large farms and factories are located in the desert, in or near oases. An oasis is a fertile region in a desert that formed around a river or spring. So as you can see, we have the Atacama Desert, which is located around this area as well. We have the jungles taking place up here. We got the Andes Mountains. So because that the topography and the physical geography of the country presents itself a lot of problems. Okay, so for example, if you're not living in the Andes Mountains, you're either living within these rainforested areas, which is very difficult to live in, or you're living inside of the desert regions along the coastline, which could also prove to be very difficult as well. So let's go and talk about a little bit more. We'll talk about the economy of Peru real quick. So we'll highlight that in green. That's going to be your guys' subject. Whatever you got highlighted in yellow should be in the right-hand column. So Peru has many resources, but it also has many problems. The country's harsh geography affects its economy. For example, the cold, rocky highlands and the cool, dry desert cover much area that there's not enough land to feed the growing population. So it's one of the huge problems that they have. All right, so when most of your land is desert or extremely high mountains, it's very difficult to grow crops, and because of that, it's really difficult to feed your population. So let's go ahead and talk about this next part here when we're talking about agriculture, fishing, as well as mining. Okay, those are all in the left-hand columm. Whatever's highlighted in yellow should be in the right-hand column. Like many other countries, Peru must import certain foods. These include grains, vegetables, oils, and some meats, many of which come from the United States. However, Peruvians do grow sugarcane, cotton, as well as coffee for export. Also, southern Peru has a large dairy industry that serves markets both in Peru and beyond. Meats from cattle, sheep, alpaca, and goats are also processed and distributed within the country. Now, when it comes to fishing, the cold waters of the Pacific coast are fine fishing grounds. Sardines and anchovies are the most important fish in the Peruvian catch. They are dried and made into fish meal, which is sold as feed for livestock throughout the world. And when it comes to mining, Peru is an important supplier of metals such as silver, copper, and bismuth. It also contains oil and gold deposits. However, the richest deposit mineral in the country exists in dense rainforests at elevations over 12,000 feet. Because it is difficult to mine these locations, Peru's mineral resources have not brought the country the great wealth that they could. All right, so in this case, they do have a lot of valuable mineral resources. The only problem, though, is that it's almost impossible to get to. And that's one of the reasons why they kind of suffer when it comes to that, when it comes to their economy. So with that being said, let's go and move on to their government now. So go and move up here. Let's get this highlighted in green here, the government of Peru. Peru declared itself independent from Spain in 1821. The nation was not completely free, however, and until December of 1824, when Simón Bolívar finally drove out the Spanish. Following independence, Peru's military leaders began fighting one another. Struggles between military and civilian leaders continued into the late 20th century. So like I said before, a lot of the countries of Central America, Latin America, South America, the Caribbean, they've always struggled with this idea of military leaders taking over their country. Okay, it's been a huge problem in this part of the world, and we've been learning about that throughout the year. So that's one of the major problems that they have in this part of the world as well. So let's go and talk about guerrilla warfare real quick. So they're going to highlight that real fast. So it's kind of funny. We call it guerrilla warfare, but it actually comes from the Spanish guerrilla, is where it actually comes from. So we actually should be calling it guerrilla warfare, but let's go and talk about that real quick. Perhaps the greatest struggle in Peru's modern history arose in the late 1980s. At that time, communist groups rose up to fight against democracy, and they felt was failing Peru. The most powerful of these groups was Sendero Luminoso, which I believe means the shining path. Sendero Luminoso fought for changes using guerrilla warfare, or non-traditional military tactics characterized by small groups using surprise attacks. Now, guerrilla warfare is actually kind of interesting. And the reason why is because when you're part of a guerrilla fighting force, you're actually not actually part of a military per se. A lot of people who fight within guerrilla warfare are usually just average citizens who've taken up arms against whatever political adversaries that they're fighting against. So because of that, they have to use a lot of non-traditional military tactics because obviously they can't fight one-on-one in a military engagement because they're not equipped to do so. That's the reason why they rely so mainly on surprise attacks as well. Unfortunately, it's also very difficult to fight against a guerrilla warfare because you're not exactly aware of who your enemy is, because the fighters in a guerrilla army are part of the civilian population. So trying to divide out your enemy targets from the civilian population has always proved to be very difficult for most militaries to do that. So continuing on, it says the military responded and many citizens died in the crossfire, and that's exactly what happens. Unfortunately, whenever a guerrilla warfare ends up happening, a lot of civilians get killed in that kind of situation just because they don't know exactly who their targets are. Until Sendero Luminoso's leader, I believe this guy's name is Abamel Guzman Reynoso, was in prison in 1992, the civil war continued. So because of that, there's still a lot of military engagements taking place in Peru to this day. In fact, the Shining Path is still engaged in military conflict in parts of Peru even today. So let's go and talk about this real quick. So moving on, it says government in crisis. Highlight that in green. As the 1990s did not bring better times to Peru from the 1990 to 2000. Oh, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. That should be highlighted in green. Sorry about that, you guys. Let me go and fix that. Government in crisis. There we go. Says the 1990s did not bring much times from Peru from 1990 to 2000. Alberto Fujimori, the son of Japanese immigrants, was president. At the time, many of Peru's poor rural people supported him, but by May 2000, however, he and his officials were accused of corruption. Many resignations followed, and in November, Fujimori abandoned the presidency and fled to Japan. The new president, Alejandro Toledo, faced the challenge of trying to win back the trust of Peruvians after the government scandals. So because of that, even to this day, they still kind of struggle with their government, as do many countries in South America, as well as Latin America as well. So now that we're done with that, let's go ahead and move on to the culture of the region. So Peruvian people and culture. Today, more Native Americans live in Peru than any other South American country. 45% of Peru's people are Native Americans. So they have a huge concentration of Native Americans in this part of the world. And the sense of the Inca, many of these people are Quichua, people who live in the Andes highlands and speak the Incan language Quichua. Quichua. Sorry, there you go. I struggle with these kind of words. I do apologize. Along with Spanish, Quichua is one of Peru's official languages. Many people in the highlands speak the language of another Native American group, the Aymara. The Inca conquered the Aymara in the 15th century, and the language lived on. After Native Americans, mestizos are Peru's next largest group, and like we learned about when we learned about Mexico as well as the rest of their different countries in Latin America, mestizos are basically people who are of European as well as Native American ancestry. Peru's population also includes people with European, African, as well as Asian ancestors. And this part's actually kind of interesting because we're talking about Asian ancestors. Peru has actually got the largest population of Japanese people outside the country of Japan. That's how come their leader, Fujimori, was the president at one time, because they have a very large Japanese population in Peru. So let's move on to our next section, which is on urban as well as rural life. We'll highlight that in green. Whatever is highlighted in yellow should be in your guys' right-hand column. It says most of Peru's people live in cities or towns. Lima is Peru's capital and the biggest city with about 7 million people. Lima has grown very quickly, which poses some severe problems. At the dawn of the 21st century, many neighborhoods lack basic city services such as electricity, running water, as well as public transportation. So like we said before, when it comes to the geography of Peru, it's a very, very rugged geography that it comes from, like we talked about earlier up here. So that's the reason why the population isn't really dispersed evenly throughout the country. There's only a few places they can actually live at with large populations. And that's the reason why they're kind of facing some issues that way. So continuing on that section, it says, Peru's rural farmers are very poor. They farm such small plots of land that often they cannot grow enough food to feed their families. And like we said before, the reason why is because there's not very much farmland to begin with in the country, so it's very, very limited in that sense. The rural people, who are mainly Native Americans, often move to the cities in search of a better life. However, many have little education and cannot speak Spanish, making it hard to find work. So because of that kind of adds to the overall negative effects that the population is facing in their country. So next up we have religion. Peru's religion reflects multiple cultural traditions. Catholicism is the national religion of Peru, and about 90% of Peruvians are Catholic. However, many Inca practices also still exist. At times, the Incan and Catholic customs mix. For example, some villages honor Catholic saints with traditional Incan festivals. And that actually, you see that quite a bit throughout Latin America. A lot of people take whatever indigenous Native American traditions they have, and they kind of blend it together with Catholicism in most cases. And lastly, we have literature. So let's go ahead and get that highlighted real quick. Whatever is highlighted in yellow should be in the right-hand column. Literature of Peru reveals modern themes as well as traditional ones. Peru's most famous novelist, Mario Vargas Llosa, is known for his belief that the novel should represent the life of the fullest. Cesar Vallejo, a mestizo, is Peru's most famous poet and is considered one of the world's best Spanish-language poets. His poetry describes what life is like for Peru's Native Americans and tells about suffering and struggles that all people may face. So there you guys have it. This talk kind of wraps up our video lesson real quick on the country of Peru for you guys' 2-column notes for pages 250 to 254. As always, you guys, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me on Schoology or through email, and I'll get back to you guys as quickly as possible. So that's going to wrap up this video lesson, you guys. That's going to do it for this one. We'll catch you guys on the next one.